Hi, and welcome to another teacher training webinar from elt-training.com. I'm Jo Gakonga, and this month I want to talk about some practical ideas for teaching grammar. I've got a feeling that this might be the first in a series of sessions like this, so I've called it Teaching Grammar 1, but the area I want to focus on today is controlled practice and getting a bit creative with it. I got thinking about this a few weeks ago when Scott Thornbury, if you don't know this blog, it's really good, highly recommended. He did a post about creative automaticity. Now this was a term I hadn't heard before, but it comes from a paper by these people. Now it was written quite a while ago, but I still think it's pretty relevant. And this is what they say about it. So what this really means is that they advocate an approach where learners get to repeat a particular structure and practice it, but in a more creative and meaningful way than traditional drill type methods of controlled practice. So here's an example of a traditional substitution drill. Now, at low levels, there may be some value in this kind of drilling. So maybe it could be for pronunciation purposes, confidence building even. And lower level learners tend to like this kind of thing, actually. I think it helps just to get the language out of your mouth. But it doesn't encourage a real use of the language. Here's another example in the written form. This is typical of many course books still. Now, here notice that I know I have to produce the present perfect. It tells me I do. So as long as I can manipulate the form, as long as I can put I have seen, she has eaten, then I don't necessarily have to understand anything. And this is the difficulty with these kind of gap fills, is that they can have, again, they have some value in at least you're practicing the irregular past participles, in this case, for example. But they don't actually necessarily mean that learners understand the meaning, particularly this present perfect, which is quite tricky. So what this paper suggests, and what Thornbury reminds us, is that the kind of activities that promote a more creative automatization here should be genuinely communicative. So we want an activity that's going to actually communicate some meaning. So it's going to be task related. That it's going to be psychologically authentic. So they have to actually listen to what's said and to react to it. So it's not just about repeating something. It has to be focused, so it wants to be on a relatively small number, probably one or maybe a couple of functions or notions or structures, so that we've got a real focus on a particular part of language. We don't want it to be quite nebulous, we want it to be very focused. It's going to be quite formulaic, so the idea is that the utterances the learners have are going to be short, they're going to be able to use them in different situations, and they're going to be able to remember them, so they'll be able to use them. And finally, and this one's really important I think, is the trick here is to find a task which gets them to basically use the same language repetitively while still being communicative and psychologically authentic. That's the trick, I think. Now, I thought that this article was really interesting, and then a few things that I read or saw afterwards jumped out at me as being really part of the same thing. So I thought I'd put this webinar together to show you some examples of this kind of creative automaticity. So some examples that Scott mentioned in his blog post were, this one was quite a nice one, the class photo. So you get all your learners together and they have to tell each other where to stand. John, stand next to Susie. Mohammed, stand behind John. John, move over a little bit. So you've got clearly all of these prepositions of place there being, but a real reason for using them. People having to listen, having to reorganise themselves until they're in a nice configuration for a class photo, for example. Another example, and this is clearly very common, and we do this all the time. Find someone who has been to Turkey, who has eaten snake, who has. So you've got to create the same multiple questions, but you are genuinely asking people genuine questions and hopefully interested in their genuine answers, and having to find particular people and therefore having to listen to their answers. This sort of thing about, if you're trying to get people with jobs, so, do you work outside? Do you work with people? This sort of thing. So present tense questioning, and the other sort of thing, this kind of thing, what kind of animal are you? So again, lots of present tense question forms, which you're going to ask repeatedly, the same kind of questions repeatedly to different people who are different kind of animals or have different kind of jobs. So these are the kind of examples of things where you've got situations where there's a limited focus on a particular piece of language. Learners are asked to be doing it repetitively, but there is some creative input there, and there is some authentic communication there. So let's have a look at some other examples. Now, this was another thing that came up recently. I saw this article by Jill Hadfield in the MET in January, and if you don't know this magazine, it's really good. There's lots of nice ideas in here, and she had several great ideas in here, and I took a couple into my pre-intermediate class. So one of them was this one, which is a really lovely poem. If you don't know it, look it up on the web. It's very easy to find. Now, here the original poem is, "When I'm old I shall wear purple." I changed it to "will" throughout on the basis that that's a more common usage, and I shortened it. There's another verse or two in here, but do stop me for a minute and just read it if you don't know it, because it is really nice. Some of the language in here was a bit tricky for my pre-intermediate learners, but they understood, I think, most of it. And there are a couple of nice YouTube videos expressing this too, so you can get some visuals on that. So when we looked at this poem, we talked about what they would do when they were old, and I got them in pairs writing their own poems. Clearly they didn't have to rhyme, this one doesn't, and thinking about what they will do when they are old. These were some of the language that I also included here was this sort of thing. So we looked at I'll definitely, I'll probably, I might, I'll, and I got them to arrange these in order of the likelihood of these things happening. So we looked at the meaning of that language. We also looked at the opposites of these, because you've got some difficult things here where the auxiliary here comes after the adverb, but here the negative here comes after the modal. So there's some small difficulties here in maybe things they wouldn't expect. So we looked at these, and then I got them to write their own predictions, if you like, and poetry. So these were some that my pre-intermediate learners came up with. I thought this was really nice. They tried to describe this word to me, toy boy, and I gave it to them, and they absolutely loved this. And then of course we looked at sugar daddy and various other things. Somebody else gave me this one, which I thought was very nice. But again, once you get this kind of thing, then you can also look at, clearly they're having a problem here with a preposition use, not surprising given their level, but you can draw their attention back to the original poem to have a look for those kind of mistakes. And one, I haven't changed this in any way, these are his mistakes, but I thought it was really nice. So whilst the others were largely doing quite funny things, this lad, and he's a young boy from Bangladesh, wrote this, and I thought it was really rather lovely. So that was one example of something where they were creative, but they were using the same structure repeatedly and practicing it. Another example that was in the Jill Hadfield article was this one, using the present perfect for experience. So she had this poem. She'd said, I always lived in Thames, but I don't. I live in Birmingham, so I changed it to that. I think it scans rather better too, actually. But clearly you can put your own town in here. So we did this as a sort of jazz chant with some music, and that went very well. And then I got them to look at their own examples. We did a bit of this in class, and they did some more for homework. And I had some nice examples in class, but one of my, say, pre-intermediate learners sent me this as her effort for homework, and I just wanted to include the whole thing because it's just so lovely. I haven't corrected it in any way, and you can see that she has misunderstood here some of the use of the present perfect and what would be better for simple past here. But these are the kind of things that clearly you can work on. But I just thought it was so beautiful. I had to show you, really. So do switch me off and have a look at that. I think it's really nice. This is from a pre-intermediate learner, so it's pretty impressive. Also then, about the same sort of time, I seem to be coming up against lots of, Also then, at the same sort of time, I came across another really nice article really talking about the same kind of thing. So this is by Alan Marsh in the ETP. Again, if you don't know this magazine, it's a very good one. Just in March, just last month. And this article was called The Door to Spontaneity, and he's really talking about the same kind of things. And one of the suggestions he had for this kind of activity was one that actually I use quite often, particularly early on in classes when I don't know the students very well and they don't know me very well. And it's very useful for simple past tense questions. So he suggests that you put dates up on the board and you ensure that they understand the did you and were you structures, and then the learners you ask the learners to guess what these dates are. They're important dates in your life, and you ask learners to guess what these are. So you only answer them if the question they ask is grammatically correct. So they've got good reason to make these questions grammatically correct. Clearly you can help them if they're struggling. And they have to try and guess. If they are really struggling, you can give them some clues. Okay. So once that they've done this orally, they then in pairs, and they've guessed what all these things are to you. For example, 1958 was the date that my parents met, as opposed to the date I was born. I'm not quite that old. And again, they've got to ask the right questions. Did your parents meet in 1958 or whatever? So when they've done that, they then need to, in pairs, write sentences in using the simple past tense again. So Joe's parents met in 1958. And then clearly they can write their own dates and do the same thing with each other. So giving lots and lots of practice in a quite structured way with actually a very focused language task here, but again, it's creative, it's personalised, and it's likely to engage them. So I thought it was a nice idea. And then the third thing that I went to, which also made me think about this and has some really nice idea, was a talk that I went to at Hadfield this year by Milada Kryuska, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, who's a teacher working in Poland, and she has a great blog, a really nice blog. This is the address for her blog, on which she has lots of nice ideas for using for grammar lessons. So I'd really recommend that. Do have a look at it. But I also wanted to show you some of the ideas that she had for, again, exactly this kind of idea, creative practice on a very narrow control practice focus. So one of the really nice ideas that she had for this was using photographs of famous people when they were young. So you can give people these photographs and ask them when they grow up, you know, when he grows up, what is he going to be, for example, or who is he going to be, maybe. You could also look at this kind of language, could be, might be, definitely is, definitely isn't, so you could look at language of possibility. I'll leave you maybe to have a look at these and see what you think. He's going to be so this one, number one up here, he's going to be an actor. It's actually Matt Damon. This guy is going to be the first black president of the United States. It's Barack Obama. And this one here, if you haven't guessed, it's Madonna, so she's going to be a singer. So again, but you know, you've got something interesting here, rather than just repeating different, the same sentences meaninglessly. It's very easy to find these kind of photographs on the net. I did a quick trawl of, I think I put celebrities when they're younger, and there's lots and lots of these kind of pairs or whatever that you can use. So it's quite easy to find stuff, and I think it's really nice. Another idea that she had was using postcards. She had lots of interesting looking postcards, but you can also do it with just looking at strange pictures. Again, Google Images here, it's very easy to find odd things. So looking at simple past tense narratives, how did this happen? So, oh, you know, she met the bear in a bar and it came home with her, or whatever, I don't know. But it's a nice way of promoting, again, simple past tense use for narrative in this case. She had another really nice idea for the past continuous tense, and I'll show you that now. So this is her personal PowerPoint, and it will be on her blog, she assures me soon. So when the photo was taken, you can elicit from people what was happening. So, you know, the man was drinking, for example. The man was thinking. They were walking. Okay, so it's fairly repetitive stuff, but made much more interesting by these pictures, I think. I don't know what was happening here. He was entering the caravan. Once you've looked at these, though, the first time round, you then say, oh dear, we've had a bit of a problem, and you give them the same photograph with the number, but they have to remember then what was happening. So they can see a little bit, but not so much. They have to remember that the man was drinking and this man was thinking. So you've got some idea of a reason here for remembering. You get them to write those down in pairs or make it a bit competitive. How many can you remember correctly? That kind of thing. So you can give them, but you're giving them a clue in these slightly obscured photographs. So I think there's lots of ways in which you can use photographs, pictures in this way very creatively and very usefully. Some of these ideas are from Malada and some of them I've sort of moved on a little bit myself, but I think there's lots of ways, and it's very easy now with Google Images to find interesting pictures in, without very much difficulty. So looking at predictions with evidence here, for example, you could get them to suggest what's going to happen. He's going to kick the cat, or maybe the cat's going to scratch him, or whatever else. So this kind of thing is really nice. And again, there's lots of repetition of this same structure. There's lots of nice pictures of weird sculptures on the net. So this, it looks like he's put his head into the building. It looks like he is trying to get into the building. So looking at these two structures, I found some other nice pictures here. It looks like he is melting, for example, or it is melting. This was a nice one. It looks like he has crashed through the wall. So again, you could look at things which have recently happened using the present perfect here and are happening at this moment in time. This one I quite like too. Okay, it looks like they are jumping off the wall. So with fairly straightforward pictures, you've got a lot more energy and a lot more reason to use this kind of language repeatedly and creatively, and it gives the learners much more of an option for using different language. This is another one. Obviously present perfect works quite well with pictures, especially if you've got something that's with an action that's finished here, so that kind of thing with what has happened. The other thing that's a really easy structure to use with pictures is the idea of modals of possibility and probability. It could be, it might be, it definitely isn't, I'm sure it's, this kind of thing, with this mechanical seagull or whatever else it is. And another nice idea, I think, is for these kind of things. There's lots of great pictures of odd houses on the net, and again you could think about who lives there, what do they do for a job, why did they build this perhaps, but I think particularly for everyday events, where's their nearest shop, where do they sleep, all that sort of thing. So I think, but with something a bit more creative, a bit more interesting, then there's a lot more room for motivation there. So hopefully that's given you a few ideas for some creative control practice with your learners. If you have any other ideas that you think are interesting and along the same sort of lines, then do put them up on the forum so that people can share them. I hope that's been helpful, and hope to see you next month. Bye bye.